And that's who we were trying to hit at first. And we got them on some bigger shows within that space, but they weren't achieving the ROI that they were looking for.
Hey there, and welcome to a brand new episode of Delivering Marketing Joy. I am your host, Kirby Hassman, and joining me today is a brand new rock star. She's like the agent of the rock stars, actually. She's the client account manager at Interview Valet, which means that she helps people build their brand by getting booked on podcasts. Liz Brooks, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Kirby. Excited to be here.
Yeah. It's been we've been working on it for a while. We had it scheduled way back when. And so I'm excited to dive in. So, they talk about specializing in blending podcast marketing with PR. So why do you believe podcasts have become such a powerful tool for brand building, and how do they compare with like the traditional PR efforts?
I think, traditional PR, it's very, we're used to seeing written content, reaching out to outlets and doing that like more traditional outreach. I think with podcasting, you're able to reach a whole new audience, first of all. Folks who are on the go, folks who I think more and more it's becoming more common for people to get their news from podcasts, or being able to get that on the go again versus like having to sit down and read it. So it's just a way to reach a whole new audience. I think also, as opposed to more traditional media and PR, it's a more personalized way to reach people. They can hear you, they can hear your voice, versus seeing written content that was written by somebody else. It's a very direct way to connect with a new audience, and then also to have them be able to connect with you on a more personal level, which, depending on what the campaign is about, can deliver a lot more ROI versus just reading an article about what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I when you said it, I think the word that comes to my mind is it's just very personal.
Yeah,
People
it's
feel like they get to know you.
exactly. Yeah, I talk to clients so much about the importance of developing your story, developing your strategy, but also identifying that human element that is going to have audiences resonate with your message overall. So I think it's just a much more powerful way to be able to accomplish that versus the traditional media that we're used to, I think.
Yeah. So what are some mistakes? What are some of the biggest mistakes companies make when approaching podcast marketing, and maybe how can they avoid them?
I think everybody comes to us wanting to be on the biggest shows possible. I can't tell you how often I hear folks wanting to be on Joe Rogan. And the first question I always ask is why? Like, is your product going to resonate with Joe Rogan's audience, or are you just throwing out the biggest podcast that you can think of? Um, One thing that we talk about a lot at Interview Valet is the importance of better being better versus bigger being better. It's about finding the right shows that are actually going to reach your target audience. It's better to speak to a room of 100 people that are focused on your subject matter versus talking to a room of 10,000 people who are just there for another reason. Like, I'm a musician, so I always say, like, it's going to be a lot more lucrative for me to book a show, even if it's on Wednesday late at night at a smaller nightclub where people are actually there for the music versus booking a farmer's market gig. Like, yeah, I'll, more people are going to hear me, but they're there for the food. They're not there for me. So yeah, I think, being open to the right shows versus the biggest shows, I think setting those expectations is very important. And then also, I think being flexible along the course of the campaign. I think a lot of clients come with their strategy already in mind. They want to hit, this certain target audience, these kinds of shows. But sometimes we'll find out halfway through the campaign that the material isn't hitting with this particular target audience. Maybe we have to adjust the material. Maybe we have to adjust the message. Maybe we have to adjust the target audience. And sometimes that is the hardest for clients to hear. But I think, yeah, just being flexible. And I think also just open to the process, especially if you're not used to podcasting, if this is your first time entering this world. That flexibility and openness to learn is going to be really, really important. because again, it's very different from social or from traditional media, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting, Liz, because I think that's true in a lot of areas, right? So, we all have a plan, but, once you implement the plan, then you sort of measure it, then it's like, oh, okay, well, we need to readjust. And I think so many times people make the mistake of going, no, and don't get me wrong, you got to stick with it, but being willing to, you know, once you learn new information to kind of create a new strategy makes a ton of sense. So I like that. So you've worked with brands on, I love the impactful podcast campaigns. So can maybe you share a success story where podcast marketing made a significant difference in a business? Can you give us like an example?
Yeah, I think I can give a few. Like one that always comes to mind, and I can't name names obviously from clients, but it was I work with folks from B2B tech to health and wellness. Like I've been all over the spectrum, but um, one of my favorite clients there. I'll say they're like an AG1 competitor type of brand. They're in the health and wellness space, and they came to us very much wanting to hit Gen Z, Gen A, Zillennials, like they were really, really focused on the younger audience. Um, and that's who we were trying to hit at first. And we got them on some bigger shows within that space, but they weren't achieving the ROI that they were looking for. And we were trying to figure out why, like especially when we were even doing ad campaigns with them as well. Um, and yeah, we weren't seeing the results that they wanted. We tried a few different things, and this was something that was a little bit risky on our side, but we started to we brainstormed a little bit, and then we're like, maybe we're reaching the wrong audience. Like, what if instead of going for the Zillennials, what if we went for like the Gen Xers? The folks who are actually buying these products more. So we pivoted to some different shows and immediately started getting a lot of invites. And so we talked to the client and we're like, hey, we know this isn't who we were targeting at first, but we have talked to some of these shows and there's a lot of interest in speaking to you and your products, etc. And it was like, like the 40 over 40 shows and stuff like that. And they were also smaller than some of the other shows that we had gotten them. Um, but they started seeing so many activations from those shows. And again, this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. They were flexible and receptive to the interest that they were getting from this other market, and they were willing to pivot, and they ended up seeing a lot of success from that. And the rest of the campaign, we ended up focusing on that audience, on that crowd, and they saw much better results than they did when they were originally focused on the Gen Z, Gen A market. So I think that, that shows not only the importance of being flexible with the shows that you're willing to be on, but also the importance of flexibility in terms of like pivoting to another audience. Yeah. And yeah, just being receptive in terms of who's interested.
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting because it's like understanding which metrics to measure, right? Like, because I think, one is a bigger audience, kind of like you talked about, but it's the farmer's market maybe. But I think sometimes you got to get in the weeds to understand which one of the metrics are actually going to make it pop. And so I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, so if a brand wants to start using podcast interviews, they're hearing this and they're like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I want my marketing to be more personal, and they want to implement it into their marketing strategy. What are the first steps they should take to try and ensure some success?
Start listening to podcasts that are relevant
Yeah.
to your audience. Figure
Yeah.
out who your audience is, who are they listening to. I think a lot of times a really great first step is to figure out who your competitors are and where your competitors are appearing, who's listening to them. um, I think also it's really important to figure out, don't go into it blind. Know what you want to say, know what your message is. uh, Really important, know what your why is. And I know that I mentioned this before, but not only do you want to develop like the strategy in terms of your messaging and your campaign, but you need to identify that human element. Like what is it that you're trying to solve? What makes your solution different from the solution of others? And then what is that human connection that you're going to be able to tell, to have audiences again resonate with you, remember you, and then come back to your website and, complete those calls to action that you're looking for. And
Yeah.
it's important to
Yeah.
have help. You can't do it by yourself. So call me, call Interview Valet. If you already have a traditional PR campaign strategy in place, start talking to them about that as well. I came from a very traditional PR background, and I got into this just because I love podcasts, and just working with our like thought leadership campaigns, even as an intern, I was like, has anyone thought about podcasting? And, folks were receptive to that. And now I'm doing it full time. So
So this is great advice if somebody wants to jump in. The other thing I would say, and I love it when guests have a point of view, right? Like it's like they have an opinion about their area of expertise, which just makes sense because, if you've been
absolutely.
living in a space, you would. And so I love that. And so I think that's great advice. And I will say right before we started recording, Liz, I told you, Interview Valet is like, we've got different places that send us guests, and Interview Valet is one of my favorites to work with. So I will just, as a podcast host, I would give my endorsement because I just think, you guys, I said, I love the one sheeters, all the stuff that you provide. So if
Thank
you
you.
are
Thank you.
interested in looking to have someone help you, I would give an endorsement of Interview Valet too, because I love getting the guests from you guys. So
Thank you so much. And yes, if you do want to learn more, you can find me at interviewvalet.com/Liz. You can connect with me there, or also LinkedIn, liz.g.brooks. I'm happy to hear from everyone.
awesome. Well, this was fun, Liz. I appreciate you sharing your perspective and your knowledge. We'll have to do it again sometime. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kirby.
All right. Well, that's going to
All
wrap
right.
up this edition of Delivering Marketing Joy. We'll see you next time.